Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the British Columbia Office of the Human Rights Commissioner's conversation today around human rights in BC. We're really happy that you can join us, and we'll take a couple of minutes to have everyone who is joining be able to join, and then we will begin the program. So I'll just say a few random words here and there just to keep you occupied as we're proceeding forward. We've got a little bit of information for you today. We're using a webinar function of Zoom, and so we wanted to give you a little bit of information about how the webinar function works. And then in addition, while we're having folks join us, we've got a quick poll for you. Where I am right now in the city of Vancouver, we've just had a bit of a rainfall, and it's starting to clear up a little bit. I've seen sunny patches coming up. For those of you just joining us, we're waiting to have other folks join. We've got around 40 people signed up for the session today, so we're just giving everybody a chance to join us in the webinar. Welcome. I'm so happy that you're able to take time to be with us today. So just to let you know, I work with 3 screens, and so I'll be turning my head from side to side. It doesn't mean I'm distracted. I'm just looking at information from 3 different sources while I'm talking. We'll give it a couple more minutes before we begin our session. I hope that some of you have been able to get out to enjoy the summer. It's my holiday week this week, and I've been able to do things around the city that I don't normally take the time to do. So it's been very exciting to be able to go for a bicycle ride around Stanley Park. And I went in the early morning when there weren't too many people, so I wasn't too nervous about, running over folks. We're expecting about 40 to 45 participants today, so I just want to give a little bit more time to see if anybody else is joining us. All right, well, I think I will begin right now. And as folks join, we will just let them know that we'll just have them join the process as we move along. So I just want to introduce myself to you. My name is Sharon Thera. I am the Executive Director of Education and Engagement with the BC Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. and I'm very happy to welcome you here today to our session. I work and live in Coast Salish territory in the lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. I'm very grateful to spend time here, and as I mentioned earlier, I've been really enjoying the territory as I live today. I want to acknowledge the territory around British Columbia and all of the Indigenous peoples who have, throughout generations and centuries, kept the land and sustained the land to keep it strong and beautiful and healthy for us to all be able to share in it today. Land acknowledgements are always an easy but also difficult thing for me at times, because they speak to a past that Canada is coming to terms with, a colonial past, and so I'm grateful that it's become a part of the way that we do our meetings, and that we're able to talk about the fact that these lands have been held and kept in a sustainable way for all of us for today. And so I acknowledge the Indigenous peoples, I acknowledge the ancestors, and I acknowledge the elders. In that, I would also want to draw your attention to the fact that our session today is specifically targeting rural and remote locations, and you live in places where you are living in sustainable ways with the land, and I want to acknowledge that you have a really strong sense of the places that you live in, and I hope that we can get to some of those, the beauty of the places that you live in and the reasons why you choose to live in the places where you live, while we speak about some of the inequities that you experience in the places where you are. I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then I will talk about the poll that we all conducted in the beginning of this process. So take it away, team.
Sure, I can start. My name is Margot D'Arcangelo, and I'm the Manager of Education with the office. And I'm here today at home on Musqueam territory. And I feel like the forces of nature just did a cleanup today. You know, it just poured, just cats and dogs, and now it is so windy. I feel like everybody's just getting a freshen up. So glad to be here with everybody, and glad to be here on this fresh day. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily. I'm the Research and Engagement Coordinator here at the Commission. I'm calling in to you from the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And just really wanted to thank you all for being here today, and really looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you. So thanks for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Selena Hsu, and I'm currently an administrative assistant for the office. I'm also currently studying at the University of British Columbia. I'm happy to be joining this meeting today from the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, as well as the Musqueam First Nations peoples.
Hi everyone, I'm Kasari Govender. I'm the Human Rights Commissioner, and I'll get lots of chance to chat with you over this time. But I'm also joining from what is now known as Vancouver, and what is the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Thank you.
So those are some of the wonderful people that I get to work with every day. I'll tell you that they're all really committed to human rights and the work they do, and this kind of opportunity to speak with you is really what gets them excited and happy. So I'm really grateful to my team for being here today. I want to acknowledge also that you'll see a name there that is Kim Captioner, and Captioner is not actually Kim's last name. That is her role. Kim is providing the captions for our meeting today. So Kim, did you want to say a quick hello?
Hello.
And so, as I mentioned, Kim is providing the closed captioning, and we're really grateful that she's with us here today as well. I wanted to share with you some of the ways that this call will work today. So I'm going to invite Emily to talk about a Zoom webinar and what the functions are within the Zoom webinar.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, so I'll go over a little bit about the Zoom webinar functions. I know some of you might be familiar with Zoom meetings, and these functions do look a little bit different on Zoom webinar. So just to go over, one of the differences is at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A box. So feel free to throw any comments you have or questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them during the call. We also have a chat function, which you'll see at the bottom. You can click the chat button and it'll pop up in the bottom right of your screen if you're on your laptop, and we'll have that just for the first few minutes. If you have technology related questions or concerns, we can help you in there, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A as our main mode of communication. There's also closed captioning that Sharon just talked about. So to turn that on, you need to click the closed caption bottom at the bottom of your screen, and then click show subtitles, and then you'll be able to see the closed captions at the bottom of your screen. And finally, we're going to do an activity in a few minutes called Mentimeter. So I'm going to post that link into the chat, and then we'll give you a few minutes to load that up on your screen, and then we'll tell you when to start using that. So thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So if you have any questions around finding the closed captioning button, please let us know. And Selena then will talk to you a little bit about some of our accessibility features in the call.
So just a quick note on accessibility during this call. All written information will be read out loud so no one will miss anything on the slides. Also created a toll-free number for people to participate via phone call without having to enter fees. We have also tried to make our visual material accessible, but we would appreciate any feedback that will help make us better. If you use your phone to call into the meeting today and want to raise your hand, please dial 9.
Thank you, Selena. So those are some of the functions. And again, if you've got questions, please do enter them into the Q&A. And I see that there are already questions queuing up. I wanted to share with you a little bit of the results from the poll that we did. Just a quick hello. So if we could see that, it looks like, well, cloudiness and raininess are leading the way across the province. And some folks are, well, 47% of you are enjoying the summer, and 47% haven't been able to get out. I hope that changes over August for you. And today people are joining because they'd like to learn more about human rights in BC and about our office. We will speak to those. We will also speak about the laws in BC. And we're very happy that you're here to speak about your issues in the community. All right, thank you so much for participating in that poll. I will just turn that off now. And I wanted to share with you some of the organizations that are joining us. As Selena mentioned, we will read through all of the slides as part of, all of the information on the slides as part of our accessibility feature. So bear with me while I take some time to go through the list. So we have the BC Association of Community Response Networks. We have the Wachier Friendship Center, the BC Federation of Labor, Seaward Island Band, Resilience BC, Bella Coola Legal Advocacy Program, the Cariboo Regional District, the Chilliwack Society for Community Living, Prince George and District Elizabeth Fry Society, Nelson and District Arts Council, the College of the Rockies, the Community Justice Center, the Nelson and District Arts Council, the Métis Nation of BC, the Cowichan Seniors Community Foundation, the Trail Fair Society, the Trauma Recovery Blog, Cowichan Seniors Community Foundation, the Haida Gwaii Legal Project. Wow, from Haida Gwaii, that's quite a distance away. The Lytton Restorative Justice Program, and I've already mentioned the Trauma Recovery Blog. And so I've read it in a reverse and mixed up order so that you don't get bored just watching me read down the list. All right, so I wanted to share with you now the agenda for the day. We've more or less covered the introductions and the opening and the call details. Next, we'll do a quick exercise around why you might attend a session such as this. Then we'll have presentations from the commission itself. And afterwards, we will move into a community discussion. And we have an evaluation in the end. We will have a break halfway through the session, right on around the hour, depending on how our timing goes. And during that time, we'll play a video and you'll have a chance to step away for a quick break and a stretch. And so with that, let us move into the Mentimeter. So I believe that Emily has shared the link for Mentimeter. And the question that we're asking you today is, what is it that brought you to this session today? If you could put a word into the Mentimeter, that might give a sense of why you might want to join a session like this today.
The Human Rights Clinic assists specifically with human rights complaints made under the BC Human Rights Code. So not charter challenges, not international human rights issues. There we go, hi. But specifically with complaints that people have made to the BC Human Rights Tribunal. We are located in downtown Vancouver.
I think we've got
our services are province-wide, so we will do our very best to assist people no matter where in the province they are. Like many of you, we have been exploring new technologies over the last couple of months, and so we are doing meetings with clients over the phone,
Margot,
by Zoom,
I think the video's playing in the background
and making it work no matter where people are. So we provide a range of different services.
We've got a technical issue with the
who are
sound.
thinking of making complaints and look.
We've got a video that's playing at the same time.
Sorry about that, folks. Interesting.
The sneak peek of what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
Are we able to get the Mentimeter back up?
Yeah, just one.
Managing all of the technology. So much fun.
To talk to someone and get pointed in the right direction.
It's on
and the
again.
right direction may mean
Margot, could you just read out the words that have been showing up on the Mentimeter for us? Or Emily, are you able to see the words on the Mentimeter?
All right, is that better? We've got concerns for the future, learning of the resources, Indigenous issues, human rights. I can keep going. Lack of rural focus, disability rights, knowledge, represent small community, post-secondary, systemic racism, concern for the future, resilience BC, injustice, volunteering, accessibility, learn about the office.
All right. Thank you all for participating in that and bearing with us while we figured out what was going on there.
Thanks for your patience there.
All of these issues that you're mentioning, most of them anyways, are within our scope of view, and we are working on a number of these issues around injustice and Indigenous issues and systemic racism, access to justice. We're very concerned about lack of rural focus and rural access to justice and information and services. So yes, we're definitely working on some of these issues. In addition, we've done quite a bit of work on looking at issues facing remote and rural communities in British Columbia. And some of the things that we have been talking to folks about include access to services, so around health and child development, the opioid crisis, and mental health. Those are the key ones that seem to be emerging right now in British Columbia as key issues for facing rural and remote communities. In addition, of course, there is the digital divide, and so We need to figure out ways right now to speak to communities in rural and remote communities. As well, of course, there's always employment uncertainty, and COVID has certainly, the COVID crisis has certainly heightened that particular issue around employment. Gender discrimination, we know that in remote and rural communities that Indigenous peoples are greatly represented, and the information from the Murdered and Missing Women's report has shown that Indigenous women suffer in remote and rural communities. There's concern around man camps as well in remote and rural communities. We know that housing is an issue, that climate change is an issue, and that of course there's a population drain that happens from within rural and remote communities. So these are key things that we're thinking about in developing our human rights strategy for the process. And we'd love to hear from you later on as we open up the floor for discussion about what you think and what you're experiencing in terms of access issues. And so from there, I would like to spend some time right now just introducing the commissioner to you. And we are very happy to be able to, after 17 years in the province, to be able to have a commissioner again. It took some time, and I hope that some of you were involved in the processes that led to the reinstitution or the reinstatement of the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. But after we had the dialogues I'm struggling with my technology here, so I'm so sorry to be skipping. But when the government undertook a series of dialogue sessions to reinstate the commission, they spent some time speaking to communities all over the province, and the people from around the province noted the need for a human rights commission. And in September of 2019, Kasari Govender was installed as the BC's first independent human rights commissioner. Her role is to lead the promotion and protection of human rights in BC through the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. Kasari has devoted her life to promoting human rights with a focus on the rights of those who are most marginalized and vulnerable. And that's why rural and remote communities are important to her. She's passionate about using her skills as a lawyer and community builder to create a more equal and just BC. She's worked very closely with organizations and communities to promote gender equality, Indigenous rights, children's rights, the rights of people with disabilities, and the rights of migrant communities. From 2008 to 2019, for about 10 years, Kasari held leadership positions at West Coast Leaf, including as executive director. She's co-authored a number of key reports and articles, and she speaks widely on issues such as violence against women, access to justice, balancing human rights, and regulating hate speech. Earlier work includes pivotal roles in establishing the Rise Women's Legal Centre, which is a nonprofit legal clinic in BC. Kasari studied law at the University of Victoria and went on to do a master's in international human rights from the University of Oxford in the UK. She was a member of the board of the University of Victoria, of Pivot Legal Society. Some of you might know about Pivot, the Coalition of Public Legal Services, and the Society for Children and Youth. She's also in her time taught as an adjunct professor of law at UBC and as an instructor in the SFU at SFU. In 2019, her work was recognized by the Women Lawyers Forum with their Award of Excellence. In addition to her role as Human Rights Commissioner, she's also a mother, an aunt, a daughter, and a sister. And I'm really always entertained to hear about the escapades of her young son. With that, I want to invite Kasari to open up our session, our presentation on the commission.
Thanks very much, Sharon. I'm I'm always happy to talk about the escapades of my young son. It's a fun anecdote to the very serious work that we do during the day. So thank you to all of you for joining us today during this bizarre time in our lives, in our world. It's so wonderful, really, to gather together in these virtual spaces and find ways to stay connected despite the distance that we are literally separated by. And you know, there are some silver linings to this process. We had originally intended to do a cross-provincial engagement in person, and we'd started doing that. We did a couple of trips before COVID hit. Of course, once we found ourselves in a pandemic, we scrambled and put together what has actually been quite a productive way to connect with people. And we've gotten to speak to more people, I think, than if we had physically traveled. And one of the benefits is imagining this session, which is pulling together people from all different locations, but with some important commonalities in terms of where and how we all live. So I'm glad that you were all able to join us to have this conversation. I think it's never more crucial, really, to talk about human rights than when we are in crisis. And it's also the hard times that it's hardest to fulfill human rights, not just talk about them, but it's most difficult to fulfill these rights. So today I want to share a little bit of information about what human rights are, what our protections are in this province, what responsibilities we share, and then hopefully to lead to a conversation. I know there have been some questions in the comments already, and hopefully we would like to hear from you about what you're experiencing in your communities and in your work. And also if you have feedback for us as we go through this process about the priorities that we're working on as an office, we are very keen to hear about that and the experiences that and how it reflects the experiences that you've had. But first, I'm going to talk about the different layers of human rights protections, the international, the constitutional, the statutory human rights protections, and talk a little bit about those distinctions. Then I'm going to pass it back to Sharon, who will give some more specific information about the Human Rights Code and how that works. And then I'll talk a little bit about our office and the watchdog function we have, and what it means for our office to be engaging in systemic human rights issues, because that's really what our mandate is. As I say, we're not going to talk for too long. We'll have lots of time for discussion afterwards. So we've already talked a bit about the homelands that we all find ourselves on, the land that's being stewarded by Indigenous people. And I've mentioned that I am on Coast Salish land. And in the tradition of some of BC's First Nations, a territorial acknowledgement is more than just recognizing the land that we are on, but also is an introduction of who I am and why I'm here and what I'm doing in this place. So in that spirit, I'd like to introduce myself in relation to these territories. I come to this place and to this work from a family shaped by the forces of systemic racism in the form of apartheid South Africa and its impacts on the Indian community in that country. I come to this work from a long line of social justice activists, including my mother, who spent her career working to address violence against women and children. And it's out of this context that I spent the last decade working as part of the gender equality movement, using law as a tool for social change, and that I now work as BC's Human Rights Commissioner. So again, I offer this introduction as a means of placing myself in the context of these lands and of this work, and as a means of saying thank you to the Coast Salish peoples who have cared for this land for generations. So let's start with a fundamental question. What exactly are human rights? What brings us all to this work and to this conversation? There are a lot of different ways to answer this question. First of all, human rights is an idea. It's the idea that we are all born entitled to the fundamental rights, just for being human, just for being people. Human rights is also an approach to work and relationships. Human rights can be understood as a framework that can guide us in creating laws and policies that seek to empower people impacted by human rights issues to involve them in the development of laws and regulations and policies that are impacting their lives, and to hold government accountable for their actions. Human rights is also a very concrete set of rights that are enforceable in different ways at different levels of law, and that's where I'd like to turn to next. So for you as a person living in BC, there are essentially 3 different levels of protections that exist. I've mentioned them briefly already, and we're going to go into more depth now. So that's international, constitutional, and statutory. They all work in different ways. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So let's start with international law. International law governs the relationship between the state or the government and individuals. So it doesn't govern the relationship of us as individuals or as organizations to each other, but how the government needs to treat us. While these obligations are binding in law, they're very difficult to enforce. And so largely these rights are aspirational. They describe how we want as societies to enforce human rights, but they aren't always necessarily kind of literally realizable in our lives. They cover a very broad range of rights. Pretty much everything you can think of as a human rights is covered in international law. And largely that applies to Canada because Canada has signed on quite comprehensively to at least the protections under international law, including everything from rights around poverty, so a right to food, a right to an adequate standard of living, to rights not to be tortured, rights protections against genocide, to freedom of speech, and those kinds of rights that keep government out of our lives in certain circumstances. They really include a complex web of rights that are outlined in a bunch of different treaties. So where Canada has signed on, Canada has an obligation to fulfill those rights, but as I say, they're not. There's no court generally that we can go to enforce those rights. You can't go to the Canadian courts generally and say my international rights are being violated. If we can go to the next slide, I'll talk about constitutional law. So constitutional law is similar to international law in that it governs the state relationship to individuals. Again, not between you and I as individuals, but as how the government can treat us. And this is binding on all government and government agents. So public entities, not just traditional kind of structures of government. One of the really big distinctions between constitutional law and international law is that constitutional law is absolutely enforceable through Canadian courts. So you can sue the government and say, my constitutional rights have been violated. What does that actually amount to? Well, this is the other distinction from international law, which is that it covers a much narrower band of rights. So it means that if your right to freedom of speech has been violated, for example, you might have a valid claim to bring to court. If your right to liberty or security of the person has been violated, if your right to equality. So it's much narrower range of rights that we call civil and political rights. It does not cover things like the right to food or rights around poverty or income. And that really is another area of law entirely. So if I can take you to the next slide, please. So finally, there's statutory human rights. This really is the BC Human Rights Code that applies here, and that's the statute that sets up my office, the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. It also establishes a set of rights that we are charged with enforcing on a certain level, and I'll talk more about that. But we are also bound under the Canadian Human Rights Act, which applies in Canada, and there's some distinctions there because the Canadian code applies to issues of federal jurisdiction. I won't go too much into that right now, but just to say that there's two statutory structures that apply to us. These rights are also enforceable, but not through the courts. They're enforceable through a human rights tribunal. So you can go to the BC Human Rights Tribunal, and similar as you do under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms under the Constitution, you can say my rights have been violated. This is the area of rights covered here is only discrimination. So not only does this not cover poverty-related issues like the Charter, but it also doesn't cover those range of rights like freedom of speech or the right to assemble and gather or the right to practice your religion. It's really focused on non-discrimination. Often we find that people are the least familiar with the layer of law that has the most daily impact in our lives. And that's really the BC Human Rights Code. So I'm going to pass this back now to Sharon to tell you a little bit more about the details of this law and what it might mean to you in your life.
All right, thank you, Kasari. So we're working in BC with the BC Human Rights Code, which is separate, as Kasari mentioned, from international human rights as well as constitutional human rights. So we've got a quick poll for you right now to just speak specifically to the BC Human Rights Code, and that should appear fairly shortly on your screen. So if you could take a minute or two to answer those questions. We will then dive a little bit deeper into the BC Human Rights Code. There are two questions. One question asks, which of the following is not a protected ground in BC? And the second question asks, which of the following areas are protected under the code? And the technology seems to be working, yay. This is a fun way for us to start the discussion about the code. And I'll give it another minute or two. While we're waiting for you to answer that question, we have a couple of questions that we wanted to ask of Kasari from the previous discussion. And I'm wondering if Margot, if you can ask your question to help us zero in a little bit more.
So I know a question that I get as part of the team on BC's Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. How do you make a complaint if it's an international human right?
You're muted, Kasari.
Sorry, I see that. I see a question in the Q&A as well about providing some more specific examples. So maybe I can weave this together. So under international human rights law, you do need to have exhausted your domestic remedies. What that means is that you have to have tried to resolve it within the legal structures available within Canada before you go to the next step. So that's one of the first things you need to do. Then you can go on some issues, depending on what Canada signed on to, there may be a complaint process. So for example, CEDAW, which is basically the Bill of Rights around women's rights internationally. And so the CEDAW Convention has what's called an optional protocol. Canada has signed on to that. They haven't signed on to that ability to make complaints under every treaty, but that is one they have. And so there is a committee appointed by the UN that's responsible for overseeing the implementation of this convention around the world, all the countries that have signed on to CEDAW. And they're also responsible if somebody files a complaint with them, and you can file a complaint with the CEDAW committee, and they can give you a response to say, yeah, Government of Canada, you need to do something about this. So by way of example, there was a woman who was not able to get legal aid in I think it was the Northwest Territories. And she filed a complaint with CEDAW. It had to do with family issues and resolving a family dispute. And I believe she was the survivor of domestic violence in her family. And so she brought a complaint saying, I need to have legal representation to resolve these issues. there was no way for her to get that heard in in Canada, because it's very difficult to launch a challenge on that basis, especially if you don't already have a lawyer. And so she managed to launch that with CEDAW and got a favorable decision. The CEDAW committee said, yeah, this violates your human rights. You're not able to get access to justice in these important circumstances. Governments, you need to think about it. And so that's one example of how international law can be useful. An example of a constitutional case that is being taken forward is you may be familiar with big constitutional challenges, for example, around whether sex work or prostitution is legal or not. You may be familiar with cases about whether somebody has the right, somebody who is chronically ill or terminally ill has the right to choose to have physician-assisted suicide. That's an important constitutional case. There was an important case about solitary confinement, another one about whether same-sex couples have the right to marry. These are all the kinds of issues that can be brought in the constitutional framework. So using the charter as a means to challenge and say, my human rights are violated. And then an example under the tribunal structure, a case last year that my previous organization was involved in was a case in which a transgender politician in BC had been subject to lots of harassment and hate directed at her, and she filed a complaint to say, this man has been violating my rights by producing these really hateful flyers, and she won that complaint. And so that's an example of the kind of discrimination that she was able to challenge through the human rights system.
Thanks, Kasari, for that. Let's take a look at the poll then. How did we do with the poll? So it looks like you all agreed that weight is not a protected ground in BC, and you're quite right about that. As well, poverty is not a protected ground. Race, religion, gender identity are all covered under the BC Human Rights Code. And so discrimination based on any of those are what you can seek a remedy for in the province. And then the second question is, which of the following areas are protected under the code? Housing is protected, services are protected, publications are protected, online publications are not. Those are federal in jurisdiction, and employment is another area that is covered. So you all seem to know the code very well, and this might be a little bit redundant for you. So I'll just ask Margot to put up the first slide on the BC Human Rights Code, and we'll talk a little bit about some examples from the code itself on how you can seek a remedy there. In BC, there are 4 areas: employment, housing, services, publications, and as well unions, where you cannot be discriminated against. And those cover different grounds. So you may not be discriminated against based on age in a service, for instance, or based on your gender expression or gender identity in employment, for example. The Human Rights Code lists these as protected traits or grounds. They're called grounds under the law. Can we go to the second slide? In order for you to bring a complaint about a particular discrimination, you have to show that there's been a negative effect. And there are, in some cases, defenses that people can, and services and employers can make in terms of discrimination. And not all grounds are covered universally across all of the areas. So you'll see up to the dotted line that those grounds are covered across all of the different areas: employment, housing, services, publications, unions. But the ones below are not covered across all of the different areas. So age, for instance, is not covered in as a discrimination when you go to buy a house. There are instances where a housing organization may have an age restriction on it, and that's not considered discrimination under the BC Human Rights Code. And the same for the other ones. You'll see source of income is covered under the Tenancy Act. So a landlord can't discriminate against you based on the source of income that you have in denying you access to a rental accommodation. And so that is the BC Human Rights Code, and it covers individual complaints, which are handled through the BC Human Rights Tribunal and not by the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. And we will talk a little bit more about that in the next part of the presentation. And so that's Kasari. Moving to the next slide.
Are we going to jump forward, Sharon, and not take a break right now?
Oh, is it break time? You see, I'm so eager to keep going. All right. I didn't realize we were already at a break. Okay, so as we noted that when we reach this part of the program, we do have a quick break for you. We'll show you a video. We'll take 5 minutes, and the video will run twice, so you won't miss any part of it if you have to step away. And we will see you back in 5 or 6 minutes. So we're putting the video up.
Like cherry tomato, green olives, and mini salmon. I am 55 and I sell activate. I'm an artist, author, and a poet. And I own Down syndrome, but I am capable. I am a human right.
Do you like nursing homes?
No. That's all CCAC said. I couldn't run the sentence. The CCAC said I couldn't decide where I live. Or who cares for me? That is wrong. It's my human right to decide.
And you didn't want to live in a nursing home, did you?
No, I don't. No, that's wrong. It's my decision where I live. I do not want to live in a mansion. That's not nice. Now I'm in the community. I'm from Vancouver, Gastown, and Habit City. I'm with Bill James and Frankie and Teresa. The community is helping us. All of my human rights. Pretty amazing. Right, me. Like cherry tomato. Like cherry tomato, green olives, and mayonnaise sandwich. I am 55 and I'm now activate. I'm an artist, author, and a poet. And I own Down syndrome, but I am capable. I am a human right.
Do you like nursing homes?
No. That's all CCAC said. I couldn't make my own decisions. The CCAC said I couldn't decide where I live or who cares for me. That is wrong. It's my human right to decide.
And you didn't want to live in a nursing home, did you?
No, I don't. No, that's wrong. It's my decision where I live. I do not want to live in a religion that's not nice. Now I'm in the community. I'm from Vancouver, Gastown, and Habit Street. Along with Bill James and Frankie and Teresa. The community is helping us. All of my human rights. Pretty amazing. Right, me.
And hello, I think we're slowly coming back. And for the next session then, we want to share with you a little bit of information about our office itself, what our office is doing and how we came about and what we hope to do into the future. So we'll move into the next part of the presentation. After that, we will have a discussion about our strategic priorities, and then we want to hear from you, and we'll open up the discussion to answer some of the questions that we see coming in on the Q&A. There are a number of really good questions coming in that we'd like to have some time to answer, as well as hear a little bit more about you and the issues that you're facing. So I'm going to pass it over to Kasari now to speak a little bit about the office itself.
Great, thank you. And I'll just ask my fellow panelists, my colleagues, can everybody hear me okay? I'm having some strange sound problems. Okay, wonderful. I think it's more on the incoming side than the outgoing side, which is a good thing. So as Human Rights Commissioner, my office works to address inequality, discrimination, and injustice in BC. And we do this through a whole host of different tactics or tools, including through education, through research, through advocacy in both the courts and with government, inquiries, public inquiries, and monitoring. So you see here before you our vision and our mandate. Our aim, our vision, is a province in which everyone's human rights are fulfilled, are realized, and our responsibilities to one another are fulfilled. Next slide, please. So I'm what's called an independent officer of the legislature, excuse me, which means that I don't report directly to the government or to a ministry, but instead report directly to the legislature as a whole. So I'm tasked with monitoring and acting as a watchdog for human rights in the province in a nonpartisan way. This kind of independence gives us the bit of distance to be able to play that watchdog role without political interference or without being subject to the different priorities of government and as government changes from election to election. We also don't get our budget through government, we get it through the legislature. So while we're accountable, absolutely, for the public dollars that we use, we are not, again, our budget isn't tied to those kinds of political priorities that the governments will have. Next slide, please. So my office is part of a three-part system of human rights in BC. So there's the Human Rights Tribunal, which exists to hear and decide complaints from individuals. So this is, I have a complaint against my employer, I believe they've discriminated against me, I can file a human rights complaint against my employer. The Human Rights Clinic exists to assist folks to bring the complaint before the tribunal. So if I was going through that process where I was filing a complaint against my employer, I can seek out a lawyer or an advocate through the clinic who can help me do that. We're going to hear more about that part of the process in a few minutes. You got a sneak preview with our technical issues before, because we have a little video of one of the staff lawyers and the manager of education at the clinic who'll tell you a little bit more about what that service is and how to use it. While the BC Human Rights Tribunal has continuously adjudicated individual complaints, that hasn't stopped. What was missing from this system for 17 years was the means to address systemic issues. So to talk about bigger issues like public policies, like changing laws, like changing institutional practices or cultural norms. And that's where my job comes in. That's what the Commission is here to do. It exists to promote and protect human rights by addressing issues of systemic discrimination and to really be in a proactive, preventative role, which is part of our education mandate, to address discrimination before it actually happens. Next slide, please. The role of a Human Rights Commission is to provide access to justice on those issues that the individual complaint system can never really address. And in this way, it's really an access to justice initiative. We are charged with examining the underlying causes of discrimination rather than the individual manifestations of it. And we've put this quote up here: racism is a structure, not an event. It certainly shows up in the events of racism. And by that, I mean the racial slurs or the graffiti on a wall or the acts of violence that might happen. But that's not what's underneath it. Underneath it are systems that support these kinds of beliefs and actions and laws and policies. And that's what we're really here to address. So I'd like to tell you two stories that I hope will help us get at what exactly is meant by systemic racism. So our systemic human rights issues beyond racism as well. So many of you will have heard, of course, about the rise of racism and violence in BC over the last number of years, but particularly over this time of COVID. The Northern Sentinel shared a story that happened in Kitimat in 2016, by way of example of what I'm talking about here. The pastor, whose name was Dan Martin, arrived to his church, the Haisla Pentecostal Assembly, to find it vandalized. And over the church's sign, the Haisla Center, someone had graffitied the words "white power." And this graffiti, of course, sent the largely Indigenous congregation reeling. I mean, it was obviously a hateful act aimed at them. In describing his experiences of hate and racism, Pastor Don Martin said, "It's often subtle. You hear comments in your community attitudes, the way people conduct themselves around you, and then sometimes it surfaces." This story does have a moment of hope in it as well. There was a local sign maker from Terrace who heard about the vandalism and volunteered to replace the sign for free. These incidences of hate and white supremacy are, of course, not isolated to this example alone. In fact, the most recent statistics on hate crimes across Canada show that there were nearly 1,800 hate crimes reported to police in 2018. And we anticipate that those numbers will be much higher this year with the real spike in cases over COVID. 43% of those cases were motivated by race or ethnicity. One community that has particularly experienced the rise of racism during the pandemic has been the Asian Canadian community. I'm very concerned that racist incidents against Asian Canadians have increased so far already quite a bit in BC. More than 77 incidences are being reported investigated by Vancouver Police alone. And of course, those are just the ones that have been reported. It doesn't speak to the many other issues that people aren't reporting. These statistics align with the many stories that we're hearing and that many of us have heard, but certainly as we engage with people around the province, we're hearing many of these experiences of racism. As poignant and as important as these examples are, it does only tell us part of the story about racism and its impacts here in BC, because incidences like this are supported and allowed for by an entire system of cultural attitudes, practices, institutional practices, and laws. And so here I want to talk about institutional and systemic racism and tell a different kind of story to illustrate that. In June of 2019, after going through a C-section delivery in Kamloops, an Indigenous couple was elated to meet their first child, a baby girl. But less than 90 minutes after becoming parents for the first time, social workers came into the hospital to remove the baby from their care. They said they'd had reports of neglect. At that time, the maternal grandmother was there and she stepped in and was able to hold off the apprehension for the time being. But 2 days later, social workers returned. The mom had a sedative that medical staff had administered to her, and when she awoke, her newborn baby was gone. For months after this apprehension, the family wrestled to have their child returned to them. And at one point, 2 social workers started supporting the family in the hearings, helping them navigate the system that they recognized is so broken in many places. Ultimately, in September of last year, BC ended this controversial birth alert system, the system that had resulted in the separation of this baby from her parents. Although that policy change doesn't take away the fact that all these children are in care or have been removed from their parents because of this policy. It doesn't change that reality for them, including not changing the reality for baby H, who's the baby in this story, who remains in the child welfare system to this day while her parents fight to get her back. And I think this story illustrates a sometimes overshadowed side of racism here in Canada, that racism isn't necessarily the product of overt actions. Again, the racial slurs, the violence, the graffiti. It doesn't require hatred. It doesn't require individual action or emotion to motivate it. Sometimes, even when there are people who recognize that the system is broken, like the social workers involved with this family, the laws and structures in our society consistently produce discriminatory outcomes for Indigenous and Black and racialized people. In BC, Indigenous children are 15 times more likely to be apprehended into child welfare than non-Indigenous children. So to combat this kind of structural and systemic human rights abuse, compassion and empathy are important starting points, but they don't get us there. They're not enough. So combating not only racism, but misogyny, ableism, ageism, and so on has to take a structural approach. So our office has been created in order to tackle systemic human rights issues, to address the issues that stand between us and this kind of systemic change that we all want, and we all have a role to play in that. On the interpersonal level, there's the role of standing up for what we believe in, interfering and interrupting racism and hate when it happens, when you're safe to do that kind of interrupting. But at the structural level, you can also support bigger structural changes in the way that bias and discrimination are coded into our laws and institutions. And I know from the list of organizations that are present here, many of you are actively engaged in this work already. And what you want to do as the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner is both to support that existing work, amplify it, and take on some initiatives ourselves to further this movement. So to return to where we started today, we are here in the midst of a global pandemic. As I said, there's no more important time to protect and promote human rights than in times of crisis. But times of crisis also give us incredible opportunities for change, for transformation. So I think it's important to look at the huge changes that have happened so far, that have happened very quickly, solutions that I think many of us didn't think that we would see in our lifetime, and yet when push came to shove, they did happen. And some of our work now is to continue to think big, to continue to push the envelope and ensure that some of those changes are long-term and that they're just the beginning of these steps as we go forward. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm really excited to be here in this role, to be working with this awesome team that you see in front of you, and to be connecting with all of you who I know have been doing this work for a long time. So I look forward to hearing more from you and answering any questions that I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasari. We've had a number of questions come up, but I think that we can answer them as we speak about our strategic priorities. There is one that came up in a question that was sent in beforehand, and it was around the issue of giving birth in remote and rural communities, and the fact that there aren't hospitals available in rural situations, and that women have to pay to go out of their communities to give birth. And that is definitely one of the issues that we saw in terms of access to health and healthcare services in rural and remote communities. Okay, can I have the next slide then? We wanted to share a little bit with you about our strategic priorities of the office. When we started and I joined the team in December of 2019, we had to think about some of the reasons that the general public in BC were considering the need for human rights at this particular time. And we knew that there were priorities in the province around particular issues. And so we'd like to share with you what we see our office working on over the next 5 years, putting a lot of energy into making a difference in these particular areas. And so, of course, we spoke already of the Human Rights Code. We will always, in all of our existence, continue to work with discrimination as prohibited under the BC Human Rights Code. So that's an ongoing strategic priority. In addition, we will be focusing on decolonization. So looking at Indigenous people's access to human rights in the province, as well as Indigenous people's worldviews and different layers of access to the complaints process, because Indigenous peoples on reserve are served by the Canadian Human Rights Code as well as the BC Human Rights Code. And so there are different jurisdictional issues as well. We know that BC has instituted UNDRIP through the DRIPA legislation. And we know that that is something that lots of communities are still figuring out, how these different laws interplay and where discrimination can occur for Indigenous peoples. In terms of human rights, we're working with the BC Human Rights Tribunal on their process to make the tribunal more accessible for Indigenous peoples. Poverty is one of those issues that's not covered under the BC Human Rights Code, and in other provinces it is. We have a number of jurisdictions across the country where poverty, or social condition as it's known in law, is covered under their Human Rights Code, and so it's, Kasari's mentioned, it's a priority that we've taken on. And I noticed that somebody asked a question around poverty and whether we have the ability to speak to that. And I'll ask Kasari to talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of social condition. I don't know if she heard me. I just flagged the issue of social condition and what we're doing in terms of trying to speak to the issue of poverty in BC.
Sorry, I didn't realize you want me to jump right in there. Yes, so it is a priority. Thank you for the question, whoever posed that. It is very much a priority for us to work towards inclusion of poverty within the code. And what that means, so right now the state of the law is that discrimination on the basis of poverty is nowhere prohibited in enforceable law in Canada. So just reflecting back on the three systems, it is prohibited under international law, but that is very challenging to enforce here in Canada and in BC. It is not in either the constitutional framework or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or in the Human Rights Code, which means that if somebody, for example, is refused service in a restaurant because the staff assume they're not going to be able to pay for their meal. Let's just say that example. There's no legal recourse for that. If someone is subject to some kind of racialized slur when they, or sorry, not racialized, but poverty-related discriminatory slur by a service provider, that's not illegal in Canadian law and in BC. So that's what we're trying to include by this phrase social condition that Sharon discussed. And we are advocating for the inclusion of that provision into the Human Rights Code.
Okay, thanks for that, Kasari. So the other two issues that we will be spending some time on are the rise of white supremacy and hate in BC. We know that the number of hate crimes against Asian people has risen in the last few months, and we expect to see different levels of that hate continuing as well. We know that racism is an issue in BC, and we've seen incidences of hate crime rise in the province over the last couple of years. We have a number of people on the line, for instance, from Resilience BC funded programs, various multicultural societies who are taking up this issue of hate and white supremacy, and we hope in the future to work closely with that whole network in this particular fight against really, what is something that we don't see as a way forward for British Columbia? We know that many people in British Columbia see our province as moving toward a state where we are starting to understand how we need each other in this world that we have to live in. And in addition, our last priority is to look at involuntary detention. So human rights of those who are being held by the state under the Mental Health Act and also under the Criminal Code. So very specific look at detentions in the province. Those are our strategic priorities. We'd love to hear from you about what you think about those. And I see that there's been a question that's come up already in the chat around systemic racism faced by Indigenous peoples. And it's a really interesting question that's come up, and I'll just read it for you. It's from Jessica, and it says, how can systemic racism against Indigenous peoples be adequately addressed by the BC Office of the Human Rights Commissioner when racism is rooted in BC as a colonial construct comprised of unceded Indigenous territories? Does this relationship not need to be fundamentally rethought with land recognized as under the jurisdiction of nations that have been here since time immemorial and maintain their sovereignty? If actions taken by the BC Canadian governments are not based on consent, how can equality exist on these lands? Will the same injustices not continue to be perpetuated without recognition of this need for consent? And I think that this is such an important question, and I think it's a fundamental question that's being asked of us, but also of the Canadian public in general, in the face of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We have to consider Indigenous laws and Indigenous sovereignty in relationship with other laws in Canada. And as we, as a nation, this is an issue we have to grapple with, because we know that it's a fundamental wrong that has occurred in our colonial past. I don't know if Kasari wants to say anything about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Jessica, and comment, really, your commentary. I think that's so important. And I agree with you. And I think that there's been some important steps, and now we have to see what happens as a result of that. So one of the important steps was the introduction of the Declaration Act, the act in BC that basically brought into BC law the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UNDRIP declaration that was developed by Indigenous people from around the world. Took a long time. It was a comprehensive process. And is one of the very few pieces that is now enforceable in Canada, because, at least in BC, because it's being directly imported into BC law. And what that does is address some of the issues that you flagged in your comment, Jessica, around really thinking through consent in a much more fundamental way, or in a way that's much more asks some more foundational questions about how this is a nation-to-nation relationship, as opposed to a charitable kind of relationship, as opposed to a caregiving relationship that the Canadian government has seen itself in some kind of paternalistic role with First Nations. This fundamentally questions the nature of the relationship, and in particular in relation to consent and land issues, but in relation to many issues. And so now that that has been adopted in the way it has, we have to see how this will unroll and push, not just stand back passively and watch, but push for there to be real change. That's something my office has thought a lot about. I'm not going to pretend we're doing this perfectly. We are a construct of a colonial enterprise, and we think quite deeply about what that means. But I think one thing it does mean is that we have a responsibility then to really push that envelope and continue asking questions of ourselves and the structures and the powers that be. So one of the ways practically what that has meant has been, speaking out on issues where I think consent is a significant concern, and consent of all nations is a significant concern, all nations whose land is impacted. And those are hard conversations, but I think that's the whole point. I think we have to put ourselves in these kind of uncomfortable situations and really confront what it means to take seriously implementing UNDRIP in Canada, because I think it does raise the kind of deep-rooted issues that you're flagging in your comment there. Thank you for raising
it. In addition, your comment raises the notion of the systemic nature of the ways that discrimination have been embedded into our society. And in taking on decolonization as one of our strategic priorities, we have taken on this notion of systemic discrimination in a broader sense. And I think that in thinking through the systemic nature of discrimination in terms of Indigenous ways of being and knowing, I think that that's affording us a chance to think in a different way about all of the systems that we have to work with. So in one sense, decolonization will help us think about all of the other systems that we do have to face and perhaps amend or change in all of the levels of discrimination across the province. So it's a very important issue that we are thinking through. One of the ways that we intend to do this work is by having an advisory council, which will include experts in various areas around not just the law, but lived experience in some of these areas. And so in particular around the notion of systemic discrimination, we will be advised by a group of people who have a sense of the larger impacts of discrimination in the province. At this point, we'd like to invite you to start sharing some of the human rights issues that you experience in remote and rural communities. Somebody has already mentioned in the chat the convention on the rights of people with disabilities that is being brought forward by that Canada's signing on to, and that is moving into legislation in the next year. We know that the Canadian Human Rights Commission has taken that on and will be holding a series of engagements across the province. They've asked for feedback from communities around the country, and we just received news last week that about 20% of the respondents in their survey came from British Columbia. So from all over the province, we have been giving comment on that convention.
And just to add to that, so while the convention has been existed in international law and Canada has been a signatory for some time, it's obviously very significant that the Canadian government has again committed in domestic law to bringing into force this convention. There's a funny little nuance that actually is quite profound, has quite profound impacts in Canada as a federal state. The fact that it's Canada as a Canadian government who signs on to these international conventions, but the international community doesn't care that some pieces fall under provincial jurisdiction and the provinces are not able to sign on or not sign on. So all governments in Canada are bound by what the Canadian government is doing, although we have our own internal structure, which is also embedded in the Constitution about who does what. So there are some ongoing conversations about what that means. And in this particular context, we as the Provincial Human Rights Commission have jurisdiction around what the province does and with enforcing conventions like around disabilities. So we're working with our federal counterparts to ensure that we can do some of that work, even though we don't have the same kind of, they've just gotten a lot of funding and gotten, this big new legislative mandate to enforce a convention, which is wonderful. But there are all these provincial pieces that really matter there. Things that the federal government doesn't have any power to change, but the provincial government does. So we'll continue to push on that front to ensure that the rights of people with disabilities are forefront and continue to be considered. And I think in the comments, there's been some conversation about the accessibility legislation that's being brought into force in BC, which is some sort of the BC equivalent to what's happened on the federal stage. And it's something that we are keeping a close eye on and in conversation with the government. But I don't have a lot more to share about what that will look like yet.
So one of the comments that came in around remote and rural access is the responsible driving program, which is administered by the Office of the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles, and how it hugely disproportionately impacts people of remote, impoverished communities. This means that when people lose their licenses, it really makes it difficult to do very simple things like go to the grocery store. And so there is a comment that has come in about how this is a big issue in rural and remote communities. So thank you for that comment. Any other human rights issues that you see in your region? There's a comment I note about the education system. Again, it's a question about systemic discrimination within the education system itself. This is another place where the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner may be able to do some interventions as we think through how discrimination is coming across, even via curriculum. I see Kasari nodding her head, which means that she wants to make a comment.
Thanks, Sharon. There was just an announcement last week or earlier this week that the ministry is doing, has appointed a roundtable, I believe is what they're calling it, of folks within the education system and community members, community organizations that are active in this space to put together I'm not sure if it's only focused on racism. I think it is, but non-discrimination in the education system and to work towards changes in the curriculum, among other things. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. It comes at a time when we are actually just starting to turn our gaze to some more concrete actions that we can take as the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. And so we're just, again, as Sharon said, just sort of thinking about how we can fit into that. That, you know, that sounds a bit vague. We're not able to be more forthcoming right at this moment about what might be ahead, but something very, very squarely on our radar. And we've heard about it a lot as we've been virtually traveling around the province, and also as I speak at various events and then get questions and feedback, I hear repeatedly about the need from folks about this kind of change within the education system. So it's definitely on the minds of British Columbians, and therefore very much on our minds as well.
I just wanted to add that the Ministers' Roundtable on discrimination is focused on racism, and they're looking at a curriculum-based intervention. So they're looking at a provincial-wide curriculum. I think that Leslie's question around whether this should not be the place where we start addressing issues of discrimination, that is education, so that it's not perpetuated into the generations. I think that that's a valid intervention looking at BC-wide curriculum. I think that's exactly the place that we need to begin this work. And you're absolutely right. We have been spending some time in sessions with high school students, and it has been so enlightening to see how engaged they are in human rights issues and thinking about their role into the future. And you're right, our generation, as we disappear, the ways that we think about our responsibilities in civil society will move on with us, and we need to be addressing younger and younger people so that they get a sense of where they can make a difference and where there can be changes in society. So hugely important for us to start with the educational system. I'll also wanted to point out that we spent some time building relationships. You know, we're new, so we haven't even been in existence for a year yet, but we've started to build relationships with the BC Teachers Federation as well to speak about this need for human rights education across the province in terms of bringing all of our students up to speed around what their rights are, around the fact that they have rights, but also that these rights bring with them responsibilities in terms of upholding these and adding to them. I noted that someone asked what we could be doing into the future about adding weight, for instance, as a protected ground or trait. It's only from community that we get this kind of feedback. We need to hear from you exactly what it is that you think we need to be upholding. What are the key issues that we need to be focusing on in order to make legislative change and policy change, as well as behind the scenes change. There's so many different ways that we can function, and it's important that we hear from you about what you think are the right ways for us to be moving as we build our office and we build our priorities. So I'm inviting more questions from you around emerging issues that you're seeing around human rights in your community or from a rural and remote perspective. And if there are ideas that you have about how these concerns or these human rights concerns can be responded to. I see a new question about responding to complaints when a respondent is known. So what if we witness somebody that we know perpetuating some kind of action? So the example that was given by Bruce is around graffiti, verbal assaults, and the many other examples in which people are seriously harmed by expressions of racism, hatred, and homo and transphobia. So this is a really important question.
I think the question is actually in which the respondent is not known.
Sorry, I misread that.
No problem. So I think that the question is, when there's these acts of violence, but we don't know who's responsible, what happens next? I think, Bruce, you're flagging something, which is that the tribunal itself, as you've noted, this is about what the commission can do, because the tribunal process, the individual complaint resolution process, has to have a respondent on the other side. So there has to be someone that you're pursuing a remedy from. I think what we can do in these circumstances is thinking about what gives rise to these issues in the first place. And I think what communities can do is to, I think, what happened in Summerland over the last few weeks. I'm not sure if folks have followed that issue, but there was a family, Indo-Canadian family had their house was graffitied with swastikas and various racist drawings, and rocks were thrown through their windows. And while obviously incredibly disturbing, the response of the community is incredible, and it's amazing to watch how this is played out. And so, just in terms of what we can all do in terms of responding to these kinds of incidences, the family started. First of all, I think the community came out in very supportive. People helped repaint their house. There was a procession in honor of them to show the support that the community had for them. The family themselves started a fund to be able to pay for the creation of a mural to celebrate equity and diversity in the community. And there's been, although there was some racism that followed in the context of some conflict within the parade that happened, or the procession that happened, there was, I think, some important systemic pieces that resulted from that. The Summerland Council has voted to begin to have these kinds of difficult conversations and engaging with their libraries, for example, to host these kinds of conversations in the community to try to get at the roots of discrimination. And that's, from my position as commissioner, that's incredibly positive step to see. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to work in engaging on a provincial level. So having difficult conversations, for example, being in uncomfortable spaces and making it feel safe enough to be able to be uncomfortable, and raising awareness in more concrete ways. We're launching a campaign that will be on bus shelters around the province to raise awareness and combat racism, particularly over this time of COVID and the pandemic. We're doing education sessions. We will be back in each of these regions to do more education and around anti-discrimination work and the law behind it. So we're taking a number of those kinds of steps, as well as, I mean, in lots of ways, this question really gets at everything the Commission does. So in some ways, you know, there's the education and engagement pieces. There's also working to change laws and policies and to make the Human Rights Code more effective and more accessible as a means to address these issues. So that's another aspect of the work that we're doing, trying to reduce some of the barriers to doing that, to getting access to their individual resolution system. So I hope that at least starts to answer your question.
There are also local actions that can be taken that will not necessarily target the person who was responsible for the hate crime. We know that different groups have started reporting projects, so you can report when there's an incidence of hate, and it's important that these get recorded so that we actually have a sense of how widespread the issue is. And also just the act of reporting itself can function as a way of helping the witnesses as well as the person who has been the object of the attack to be able to start to process it and deal with it. So it's important that if you don't know the person, that you might consider looking to a group that might be doing a recording project. So if you are interested in those, we'd be happy to share the groups that we know about. Please feel free to contact us at the end of the session. As well, we know that the spokes that are involved in the Resilience BC process will be taking on different responses in different communities. And so those might be a way that you can connect in your local community to address some of those issues. I've seen that Leslie has made a comment about, it's a really nuanced comment, and it's about the industries that support the economies of remote and rural communities. And it notes that sometimes those industries might be promoting a culture that is in and of itself rigid and racist. And so if you are dependent economically on those groups and you're getting these kinds of beliefs, it strengthens the systemic disparities, and they can become entrenched in rural communities. And certainly that can happen for sure. And that's why community action is so important. Groups who work provincially and nationally can provide frameworks and ways of thinking about these issues, but really this is where an informed citizenry becomes important. One of the things that we wish to do at the Commission is to be able to provide resources for communities to think about these issues, but also to start responding in their own ways. And I definitely know that the Resilience BC network, that is a part of their process as well. So we hope in the next few years to be able to bring you these kinds of resources that will allow you to be able to act in a local way in your region.
If I could just add to that question, of course, there are many answers, but probably none of them completely adequate to that question. But some of them that occur to me is that I think one of the things you're pointing out in this question, Leslie, is that that there are these, that we know these racist and as you said, rigid structures exist. That's true in terms of sexist structures and others, ableist and so on. And that it's sometimes hard to get traction on human rights and social justice issues within that system. And one of the ways that I think it's really important to be able to get traction is to be able to have the data and evidence that we need to show how decisions of institutions and companies and industries and governments, what the impact of those decisions is on people and the disparate impact that those decisions have on different populations. So to kind of ground that, what I'm really talking about is kind of race and other disaggregated data. So how do we understand who these decisions are impacting? So we are working hard on that issue. It's something that my office, along with many others in the community, have been calling on the government to take action on. And as a result, the Premier, I think it was in mid-June or so, asked me for advice about how to do that in a way that was that data couldn't then be used against marginalized communities, so used to further stigmatize people. And so, you know, an example here might be the impact of so-called man camps on women, Indigenous women in rural communities, or on right now, a friend of mine, on the health of Indigenous communities, of the impact of transient worker communities on the health of local communities. And part of that is, do we have the information that we need to be able to make those kinds of decisions? So we are working hard to provide that kind of advice. That advice will be done in the next month or so. We'll be writing a report that we will be making public, providing that kind of guidance about how the government should go ahead and collect information. And what I'm talking about here is information across government. So not just about healthcare and COVID, but really across all ministries, that I think will help us make better policy decisions and regulate, for example, industries better if we know who their decisions are impacting. That's not to say that many of us in racialized communities don't already know the impact on us of certain decisions, but this is a way to make that evidence more visible and known to government and policymakers.
So Deborah's sent in a question around seniors and seniors care, and this is an issue that we, when we started to look at access to services in remote and rural communities, that came up quite frequently, and it's the issue around not being able to stay at home when you're near end of days, and the fact that you might be moved several times. And Deborah mentions as far away as 150 kilometers or more from home and families. She's speaking specifically about the East Kootenays, but certainly it's true for other remote communities, this idea of having to be moved because the services aren't available in communities. And the question really is about whether our office is able to investigate or explore these lack of options for seniors care.
It's not outside our jurisdiction and what we can do, but because there is a seniors advocate that is explicitly charged with doing this kind of work, it's unlikely that we would do a significant amount of work or produce a significant report on this unless we were unless the seniors advocate, that would be useful to the seniors advocates work, because I know that they're looking at this issue for sure. So, but that doesn't mean that we're not paying close attention to what seniors are experiencing in the context of human rights and discrimination. It's just that as we develop our mandate, we're aware of we can only do so much, and where we know there's another entity doing work in the area, we're unlikely to we want to not duplicate, essentially. So we're unlikely to speak directly to this issue. That said, I really appreciate the concern you're flagging. And it is a moment just to say that even if we don't get a time today to talk about every comment that's here, all of this information is coming back with us to the office. I know not all of these are questions. Some of them are maybe framed as a question, but they really are kind of illuminating for us what's happening in your communities. And that's what we're here to learn. And so we're taking all this back with us and integrating it into our plans as we go forward.
I just wanted to add that Bruce has noted that the Resilience BC groups are, the monies that they get in annual grants is fairly limited at $7,500 a year. And he's asking about whether the Commission can provide funding to communities to develop their own responses to incidents around the protected grounds of the code. He feels that collaboration with Resilience BC could significantly be enhanced if that was available.
We're not in a position of being a funder, unfortunately. We're not able to do those kinds of grants in the way that we're set up and structured. That said, it doesn't mean that we can't amplify and support the work of community that's being done. And we're very keen to be connected to what's happening in the province. So if you are a group that is working with one of these grants and you see some opportunities for us to do exactly that, to amplify and support the work you're doing, please reach out to us. One of the things that I've been saying as we travel across the province is, if your organization is writing a letter to the government asking for some systemic change, some policy change, which I can see being potential result of some of these grants, to say, this is what we've learned, this is what's happening in our community, this is what we see the solution is, and we're asking the government to take this kind of action. Feel free to CC my office. We're not going to be able to take direct action on every piece we are CC'd on, because we are getting pulled into a lot, because I've been saying it everywhere we go. But it is absolutely essential to being able to do exactly the work that I've just mentioned, the amplifying and the supporting, because I have this unique opportunity, and we're not part of government. We're not exactly a nonprofit. We're kind of in this unique space of being an independent office of the legislature. But what that allows us to do is have conversations with government that I know, certainly if coming from the nonprofit community, I wasn't always able to have those conversations in my old role. And so because we're able to have those conversations, what we want to be doing is to be amplifying what we're hearing are the calls for change on the ground. And so it will help if you can tell us what you're calling for. I hope that at least provides some support to the work you're doing. I can see why you feel the grants are not enough. I wish we could do more.
There are some additional things that we can do as well. We are developing programming around human rights in the province. And so if you feel there's need for a particular program or a workshop, that kind of thing, we are absolutely able to point you towards resources. And if there aren't resources, and if there's enough demand in the province, we absolutely can develop something as well that might address your needs. So please do think about the direction that you think your community might need to go in, and have a chat with our office, because it might be something that already exists that we could point you in the direction of. We've got a question that's come in around whether we play any role in ensuring buildings are accessible. And then the question goes on to elaborate about, for instance, educational environments, so college buildings or school buildings, that kind of thing.
Our role is in contributing and consulting on the accessibility legislation. So if you participated, if anybody here participated in the community consultation, and again sees that there may be something that will help us talk to government about what this accessibility legislation looks like, which is addressing built environments and accessibility in that context, please again feel free to send it our way, because it will help sharpen our comments to government on this issue.
Any other questions around what you are experiencing in your community around human rights issues? Anything you'd like to flag for us? Or moving forward, thinking about what you might want to see if we ever have a chance to come to communities again, what you might like to see us bring to you in your region. What kind of information sessions, what kind of workshops? Are there any issues that are key for you right now that you think we could perhaps bring some information to you around?
And Sharon, maybe while folks are just thinking about that latest question you posed, we could play the video from Laura, which talks a bit about the education initiatives that the clinic does, as well as their direct services.
So thank you, Kasari, for reminding me. One of the things that Kasari mentioned is that we are part of a 3-part system of human rights in the province. While we deal with systemic issues, we don't deal with individual complaints. Our 2 sister agencies do deal with individual complaints. They are the Tribunal and the Human Rights Clinic. The Tribunal, of course, hears human rights complaints, and the clinic provides legal assistance in terms of human rights complaints to the Tribunal. So we have a small video around that particular process that the clinic provides?
So the Human Rights Clinic, as both Sharon and Kasari have noted, is part of the Community Legal Assistance Society, or CLASS for short. CLASS has been around since 1971, and we've been providing free legal services to low-income folks ever since that time. The Human Rights Clinic assists specifically with human rights complaints made under the BC Human Rights Code, so not charter challenges, not international human rights issues. There we go, hi. But specifically with complaints that people have made to the BC Human Rights Tribunal. We are located in downtown Vancouver, but our services are province-wide, so we will do our very best to assist people no matter where in the province they are. Like many of you, we have been exploring new technologies over the last couple of months, and so we are doing meetings with clients over the phone, by Zoom, and making it work no matter where people are. So we provide a range of different services to people who've made complaints or who are thinking of making complaints and looking for more information about their rights and their options. First, we have an information line. Folks can call any day of the work week, Monday to Friday, 9 to 4:30, I believe, to get more information about human rights, about how to file a complaint, where to go to get the form, and just sort of basic general information about human rights. That's staffed by a real live person. It's not a recording. You'll be able to talk to someone and get pointed in the right direction. And the right direction may mean making an appointment with our Monday short service clinic. We used to call it a drop-in clinic, but we're trying to move away from that language because we hope that people will make appointments rather than drop in. And especially while we're offering these services online, it's helpful that people can make an appointment. But we do have these appointments available to anyone, again, anywhere in the province, whether you filed a complaint or not. Doesn't matter what your income is, doesn't matter what stage of the process you're at. You can make an appointment for a half an hour session with a lawyer or an advocate. We run these every Mondays, and we'll talk to you about your issue, your complaint, and give you some general advice and information to help you figure out what to do next. The next service that we offer is legal advice and representation. So the other two services are available to anyone at any point. To apply for legal advice and representation, you do have to have filed your human rights complaint already and had that complaint accepted for filing by the tribunal. So when you file your complaint, which is totally free to do, the tribunal will take some time to screen it and make sure that it's something that they can deal with. And provided that it is, they'll send you a letter saying, okay, your complaint has been accepted for filing. Now the rest of the process will get underway. And at that point, you can send that to us at the Human Rights Clinic and apply for legal representation. And it's at this stage that we do have to do a bit of screening because we simply don't have the staff or the resources to provide a lawyer or an advocate to everyone that applies, but we'll look at your income and look at our capacity to assist and do our very best to match you up with a lawyer or an advocate that can help. In particular, we try to help people who need some assistance at mediations. That's generally the first step in a human rights complaint, is that the parties will see if they can resolve the complaint through mediation, and we'll try to provide some assistance for that. If we can't provide full representation, at the very least, we can usually provide you with some coaching and some consultations to help support you to represent yourself and just feel like you have a better understanding of the process and what you need to do. And the last service that we offer, a little bit different than representation and advice, but we offer education. So I speak to community groups all over the province all the time to help them understand what the code applies to, how it works, what discrimination means, and how to access and make meaningful those rights in your own life. We also do workshops and trainings for those who, I really like this language that the commissioner is using, have responsibilities and are duty bearers under the Human Rights Code. So employers, landlords, other service providers, we help them understand their obligations, their duties, their responsibilities under human rights law. So we do workshops and trainings again around the province, usually in person, although lately we're doing lots by Zoom online, to help people understand both their rights and their responsibilities under the code. So that's a little bit about the clinic. I don't think I've mentioned this yet. Our services are totally free. We're funded by the provincial government for the most part to provide free legal services, so nobody has to pay for any of the advice or representation that they receive through our clinic. That was an important thing to make sure that I mentioned. Thanks again to the Commission for having me today.
Oh, thanks. So that's a little bit about the BC Human Rights Clinic and the work that the very important work that they do. With that, failing to see any new questions come up, I will just take some time to thank everyone who's been involved in the call today. And thank you for spending your last 2 hours with us. I hope that you were able to gain some information and get a little bit of an understanding about what we do at the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner and where we think we need to be doing more work. And we've certainly heard from you about areas where we could be improving some of the focus that we are leaning towards. Thank you to everyone today for participating in the session. We just have a quick poll for you to take part in. It helps us to improve the work that we're doing as we move forward, so we'd really appreciate you taking time to fill it in. And I hope you have a lovely evening, and that those of you who aren't able to appreciate and experience the summer yet, that you're able to go out and spend maybe a few minutes out in the warmth or the rain, as it may be. I want to share with you that in our next series of engagements, we will be providing a look at a deeper dive into the BC Human Rights Code. So over the fall, we'll be providing remote workshops via Zoom around the BC Human Rights Code and about the complaints process and so on, in a little bit greater detail, so that you can learn more about the remedies that are available to you in British Columbia. All right. With that, I'd like to ask if any of the team want to say any final words, and then I'll ask the Commissioner to make some closing remarks.
Thank you to everyone who attended. We learned a lot from you about what's happening in your communities and across the province, and some of those issues we've heard about from others, but also what's unique or what's particular to rural and remote communities, which is incredibly helpful to us as we undertake this project of addressing human rights all the way across the province. And really delving into how discrimination and inequality impacts each of us, but also differently, different people in different ways. So thank you again for being here with us, and we hope to see you again when we do this later on in the year as well. Thank you, everyone.
Take good care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.